Chapter 185 The Strong. While Han Li was on the outer edges of the forest, he found a dense, large tree. When he jumped on top of the tree to recover his strength, the entire forbidden area had reached the first climax of the Trial of Blood and Fire's massacre. Various strong individuals revealed their fangs one by one and began to purge the nearby weaklings. The closer they were to the center of the area, the more frequent and bloody the massacres became. Of course, experts of equivalent strength would occasionally run into each other. They would look past the other person and reach a wordless, mutual understanding, simply brushing past one another. It was not time for them to do battle yet. With this said, of the many disciples from various sects in the forbidden area, the majority could be divided into three types of people. One kind were those who were extremely weak, people whose cultivation were only around the 11th or even 10th layer. They all had very different reasons for entering this forbidden area. If it wasn't because of hardships against their will, it was because they were forced, or it was because they were hopeful in their luck to take advantage of a crisis for their own gain. Regardless of their reasons, they were all part of the bloody massacre's lowest level, only able to play the role of being slaughtered. Often after the first day in this forbidden area, apart from a few people with the most clever and particular self-preservation methods, these weaklings were almost completely purged by others. Of course, people like Han Li could rely on strange treasures and fierce incisiveness, but he could be considered an exception. The second kind were those like the fully bearded man. Although their magic power was not weak, their self-regard and strength could not compare with the experts, and they were aware that to obtain a spiritual item was beyond hope. They were unwilling to battle with the highest layer experts inside the forbidden area for the spiritual herbs, instead turning their attention to the first type of people. They intended to use this opportunity to kill these people and steal their treasures, quietly becoming very rich. These kinds of people inside of the Trial of Blood and Fire, for the first 2 days, were quite active. When the third day began, however, the remaining victors would automatically lie low in the forbidden area, refusing to reveal themselves anymore. This was because they were very clear that after the third day it was time for the experts to have showdowns with one another. If these middle-strength people ran into such an expert during this time, it would absolutely be a one-way trip to death. Of course, there were also a few who were either arrogant or did not have a grasp of their own strength and would charge directly into center of the battle for the spiritual medicines. Their bodies would never be found. However, most of the people grabbed opportunities early and withdrew quickly, and were often the most common type of person in the Trial of Blood and Fire. In contrast, the strongest individuals would die tragically one by one, as if part of some kind of joke. Thus, the last type of people became the least common. These people were at the top of the pyramid, and they were the most elite disciples of the various sects that had entered the forbidden area. They were the ones that the various sects had placed their high hopes on. As for the other disciples of the same schools, they were at the most cannon fodder, meant to aid the plans of their various sects. This group was elite, their magic power was profound, complemented by magic tools with astonishing power. They only had one goal, which was to kill all the disciples of other sects and steal away enough spiritual medicine. The extent of the first massacre at the start lay in their mutual, wordless understanding to first get rid of the trash and all those who were only there to take advantage of the situation. This was to prevent these people from obstructing their movements and, in general, any problems from sprouting up. In addition, the news that someone had been one step in front of them to the central area did not make them panic or become edgy. Entering it was easy, but if they wanted to bring spiritual medicine out, that would be incredibly difficult. The massacre continued to progress, but because Han Li was still a distance away from the central area, he was still not able to involve his recovered self. However, other weaker members were not as lucky as Han Li, and many were brought into the middle of the massacre even as they desperately struggled to free themselves to protect their own lives. And Saber Transformation Docs Su'er was one of these people. Today, Su'er's face was deathly pale, staring at the person in front of him with an expression of pure terror. This person was big and was carrying a giant silver sword. It was this person who had, right in front of Su-er, already killed the other two disciples from Saber Transformation Doc. Under his giant silver sword, it didn't matter what kind of high-grade weapon and protective armors were used, it was as if they couldn't even withstand one attack, being ripped apart one by one as if they were thin paper. They were inevitably sliced in two. However, it was because there were those two other disciples from the same sect that Su-er, seeing that the situation was far from good, seized the opportunity to slip away, falling into confusion as he ran. Unfortunately, the big man didn't seem to have the idea of letting him go, instead persistently chasing him for a few dozens of hours and finally catching up to him here. This caused him to thoroughly lose hope. "If you kill yourself, I can leave you an intact corpse," said the big guy expressionlessly and with a cold glare. You can go die." In the midst of his hopeless situation, Su-er, who knew that he would not live much longer, erupted in fighting spirit. He took the only two high-grade magic tools he had on him and, in one breath, threw them all out. "Idiot." The big guy spoke this very deliberately. Next, the huge silver sword flew from his back into the air. As if without effort, the two magic tools were broken into pieces. In the same motion, Su-er was also cut into two pieces. After finishing all of this, the big guy did not even bother to look at Su-er's corpse. Instead, he spun on his heel and left without even the idea of moving towards the storage pouch. To him, the only magic tool he needed was the huge silver sword. Any other magic tool or precious item would only distract him and would be a big hindrance to his cultivation. At the same time, at a small brook near the central area, a female disciple of the Masked Moon sect controlled a magic tool like a scarf while drenched in sweat. She was currently bitterly defending herself from two red, shiny daggers, but it seemed as if at any moment she would be unable to defend herself any longer. Could this senior martial brother wielding daggers please let this junior martial sister go? I am willing to serve senior martial brother with my body tonight. Since this woman was at death's door and was past caring about shame, she used a woman's greatest advantage and tried to seduce him. But would it succeed? Based on their encounters and the tactics he had used, she had absolutely no idea. "Fine, withdraw your magic tools and I'll agree." The person speaking was an 18 or 19-year-old male wearing a earthy-colored robe. He had delicate features, red cheeks and white teeth, all the characteristics of a delicate, handsome male. Having said this, he stopped his two daggers in midair and lightly smiled at the woman. The Masked Moon sect female was delighted and hurriedly gave him two winks. She hesitated for a moment, then slowly allowed the scarf to descend, retrieving it into her hand. Then, she stuck her breasts out, as if she was about to say something. Unfortunately, before she could open her lips, the handsome male's face suddenly expressed a killing intent. His finger violently pointed, and in a surprising turn of events, two red flying daggers immediately cut in a crisscross. The woman, without a whisper, fell to the ground, fresh blood puddling on the floor. SLT. Even someone as common and unrefined as you thinks that they can seduce me, Han Tianya. The handsome male's face bore an expression of disgust, his voice suddenly becoming intense. Next, he took out a pleasant-smelling handkerchief from his waist, delicately wiping the dust on his face. His movements were very gentle and reserved, as if he were an unmarried daughter of a noble household. "I should hasten my journey, perhaps there will be others along the road who will also provide some entertainment." After thinking this aloud, the male carelessly tossed the handkerchief he had used to wipe himself onto the female's face, leaving with a swagger. Deep in the forest, a disciple of the spirit beast mountain lay dead on the ground. A yellow-robed, middle-aged man stood nearby. He was currently shaking his head and staring at the sky, mumbling something to himself. Behind him were a few extremely fierce beasts lying on the ground, not moving, without a breath. On top of the barren mountain, an ugly-faced, green-robed man was frantically controlling about a large swarm of huge bees, besieging a few people dressed like Taoists. Just like that, the strong massacring the weak could be found everywhere in the forbidden area. Although Han Li did not see all of this, he could faintly smell a bloody scent drifting through the air. However, he had no time to look into the whole story, instead sitting on the treetop without moving, gradually restoring the magic power in his body. The time passed by very quickly, and more than half of the first night in the forbidden area had already gone by. What shocked Han Li was that in this area, the amount of extremely bright light was the same during both daytime and nighttime. The entire sky was always an overcast color, making people who saw it feel somewhat unsettled. When his magic power had been restored enough and as Han Li was rejoicing quietly in his heart, the sound of hurried footsteps and heavy gasps suddenly came from far away, slowly getting closer. It was as if there was someone running towards the very tree that Han Li was meditating on.